We focus on ethics, but we never look at the magic. I used to thought I was a muggle, and then I used AI, and I'm like, wow, we can do some fantastic things that we would never do without AI.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, and we cover topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and climate change. Basically, all the subjects that today's leaders need to be across in 2024.
Our podcast isn't about shiny corporate case studies, it's about lessons learned and progress made the hard way, and crucially how that can inspire others. This episode is our conversation with Devi Thomas, who is the global leader in the non-profit community capacity at Microsoft Philanthropies. And Devi brought along a Microsoft success story in Dan Kershaw from a charity called Furniture Bank in Canada.
This was a great conversation about getting comfortable with AI and how charities can benefit from investing time to experiment with AI and emerging tech. It was great to hear from Dan about how Furniture Bank is using AI for content generation, allowing the charity to run photographic campaigns using AI-generated imagery, a fascinating case study with a very moving outcome. And you can see that campaign by following the links in the show notes.
So we've had a little break. Just so Zoe could watch more of the football during the Euros this summer, and it's worked because England have made it to the final. So congratulations on that, Zoe. Of course, I jest. I mean, I'm assuming you have seen some of the football, but we really had the break because of the general election.
Yeah, that's my equivalent of football, basically.
Yeah, so lots going on, including, and I do have to say right now, there you might hear some banging in the background. We have some building work going on at the moment, so apologies for that. But yes, we had a bit of a break, primarily for the general election, because we were scheduled to put an episode out on July the 4th, and we thought actually there's probably more going on than us putting a podcast out on that day. And we now have a new Labour government, which is big news, Zoe.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And there's been a lot of talk over on Twitter because of this reset in the relationship between civil society and government, which Labour has been promising ever since they were still back in opposition mode. And also there is quite a lot of charity and public sector experience around the cabinet table, which is exciting. And also there's a lot of lived experience as well. So there are cabinet ministers who got experience of growing up in social housing and being on free school meals, and also very high level of ministers who are state educated as well, is my understanding. So it's really exciting to see that there is more diversity in cabinet and the effect that will then have on policy and the way they lead. And I think there are some quite interesting levels of diversity amongst the wider new MP intake as well, is what I've heard too. So that is also really exciting. And I think we could be entering a new era for government.
Yeah, and it felt like a shift, didn't it, when you saw the new MPs walking into Downing Street on that day, joining the cabinet and being announced for the first time. And it was a succession of really interesting hires, I thought, especially when the news broke about how he wanted to bring in Patrick Vallance as science minister, James Timpson as prisons minister, Richard Hermer, who's an expert on international law, as his attorney general. And it was really interesting from my perspective to see, experts to do expert roles, people with experience to deliver in roles where they can affect change because they've seen it before. And that ridiculously feels like an enormous shift change for government, certainly.
Definitely, yeah, and I think this is going to be a whole new chapter, and I wonder whether it will filter through into how organisations recruit as well. Perhaps a bit more of a shift to involving people with lived experience, and maybe ratcheting things up a notch or two in terms of expectations of expertise and professional experience too. I think that could be really exciting.
Yeah, and it was interesting because my reflection, as as listeners know, I work predominantly in the private sector and in a lot of organisations that are partnership organisations, professional services organisations tend to be built in that way, and until you sort of get used to the structure of those organisations, it can often seem at odds with what you'd expect in a traditional sort of corporate environment where you bring in an experienced person in marketing or HR to lead a specific function. But often in accountancy and law firms, that responsibility is given over to a partner who is invested in the organisation, especially if they're an equity partner or an owner partner. And it can sometimes be frustrating that your head of your lead within a particular area has not got the expert knowledge that they might need. They surround themselves with people that do have that knowledge, but ultimately that responsibility is sort of filtered down through the organization rather than having that figurehead responsibility. And you reflected just now that the same could be said for CEOs, perhaps in a charity role, where they don't necessarily have lived experience of the cause that they are working within now. But again, we've heard lots from leaders over the course of our episodes this year and last year around how they are surrounding themselves with the expert knowledge and help that they need to be able to perform and do that role, which seems very similar to the case we have here.
Absolutely. And just briefly before we move on and talk about the next topic, I've actually got some numbers for you here about the makeup of the new parliament, and we can stick this link in the show notes. I know you love data. So out of 600 people elected last week, so 335 have never been an MP before. I'm genuinely really excited to see what that does to how this new intake actually goes about being a politician and setting policy. I think that's going to be really, really fascinating. Also, for the first time in parliamentary history, the proportion of women elected is more than 40%. So it's up from 220 female MPs in 2019. It's now 263. So that's nearly half of those are new to Parliament. So that's very exciting. And in terms of ethnicity, again, some really good progress there, actually. So the proportion of MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds is now 90 or 14%. That's up from 66 at the last election. And it's actually not far off the levels in the wider population. So 18% of Britons identified themselves as non-white in the 2021 census. So this really does feel like a new era, which is very exciting.
Yeah. And one that we will definitely keep an eye on, running a podcast about leadership. It did seem like something we might want to reflect on. And also, as a podcast that focuses on digital, this week, Zoe, you've launched the latest iteration of the Charity Digital Skills Report. And did you want to share a little bit about the launch and how that's going?
Yeah, definitely. So we are recording on Friday, the 12th of July. So it's the day after launch. And we have had really good feedback on the report already. So we had some really great press coverage from the launch. So thank you, Third Sector. Thank you, civil society. And lots of people at the launch event as well. So we had 300 people register for that, which is super exciting. Some really interesting findings. So the cost of living clearly having a massive impact on charities' digital progress. So almost 7 out of 10 charities said that they were struggling with that, compared to 27% last year. But yet charities are still progressing with digital. So 80% say that digital is an organisational priority. 61% are using AI in day-to-day operations. That's up from 35% last year. And speaking of leaders and what people want from leaders, 39%, so that's almost 4 out of 10, want their CEO to keep up to date with emerging tech trends and AI tools. So I suspect that last one in particular is something we will come back to during our future episodes, actually, how that role of the CEO is going to shift and change with all this emerging tech development that's going on at the moment. And then finally, some really worrying findings on inclusion. So 41% of Black-led charities said that they face barriers to digital project funding. That's almost double the amount of charities who are also struggling with that from our main sample. So only 21% were finding it hard to find digital project funding compared to Black-led charities. So clearly something's gone very wrong there in terms of taking a more inclusive approach from funders, and that needs to be looked at urgently. So we are going to be lobbying funders about that over the weeks and months ahead. And funders, please come and talk to us about that. We want to share this data with you in more depth and talk to you about what you could do differently.
Sounds good, and good that you've got the, you said as well to me that you've got lots of press interest as well. So hopefully that means that story is something that they lend extra focus to, and we can certainly do something about it and get that number improve over the course of the next year when you do the next version of the report. Not that you want to think about that this week, I'm sure.
Maybe a holiday first, Paul. I think I need a little break. Much as I love it, a little break. Get rested and then come back.
Fully fighting, yeah. Okay, so now for our interview with Devi and Dan.
We are very excited to welcome two special guests to this AI-focused episode of Starts at the Top today. Our two amazing guests today are Devi Thomas, who's Global Leader, Non-Profit Community Capacity at Microsoft Philanthropies, and Dan Kershaw, who's CEO of Furniture Bank. Devi and Dan, welcome to Starts at the Top. We are so delighted to have you here. Thank you for making time to come and talk to us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We're very excited about chatting to you both today. And Paul has got a very exciting first question, which is based on some research which came out yesterday at the time of recording.
Yes, so today is the 29th of May. This came out yesterday, so we haven't had too much of a chance to have a look at this in too much detail. But I thought there was a sort of a broader question within this that might be helpful for people listening to the podcast. So the headline of this joint study, it's between a study by the Reuters Institute and Oxford University, as we said, released yesterday, suggests in the sort of the executive summary and the findings that there is a bit of a mismatch between the hype and general public interest in generative AI in particular. And I just wondered whether that would be a useful way to kick off this call, because there'll be lots of people listening who are approaching AI from either a very informed point of view, because there is so much hype and so much noise about AI in the news, in the world, and in the world of work especially. But I also wondered whether that might be driving some challenges as well, certainly around the idea that people might try to jump in too quickly or drive AI faster than they are able to, whether that's a case of them jumping in too soon and too fast. But I just wondered if that was a good way to frame the opening of the conversation.
Thank you, Paul. So this is Devi from Microsoft Philanthropies, and I just wanted to take a second and just share a little bit about what my role is before I comment on that question. I help the nonprofits that work with Microsoft, which is a little over 350,000, make sure that they have access to the best resources that Microsoft can offer. And that really comes in a lot of different forms, those resources. A lot of it is through learning and skilling programs and that are specifically related to digital and AI. We create a lot of community convenings and events for our nonprofits, and also provide access to free and discounted technology for nonprofits to use. And all of that is inclusive of the AI tools that we read about today, particularly generative AI. So this question really is quite interesting, and something that I'm sure everyone has sort of thought about. At what point in the AI journey am I, and am I moving too fast? The first thing I'd like to say is that, I have not read the study, and you mentioned that it was relatively new, so I can't comment on that. But one thing I can probably guess is that the majority of the study was probably done through the commercial lens, right? And not particularly looking at the charity sector or the nonprofit sector worldwide. And I can see that several countries were covered here. So, what I'd like to do is just take a look at some of the data that we do have around nonprofit usage and AI. And what I do know is that even in late 2023, the data that we have shows us that the nonprofit sector is very much interested in AI. They were certainly concerned about some of the aspects of AI and are questioning some of the use cases, but overall, the opportunities outweighed some of those risks or challenges. And this is primarily because in the sample we looked at, which was about 402 nonprofits worldwide, 66% believe that AI can actually create the first version of their work. They felt very comfortable with Gen AI doing that. And by doing that, they believed that AI can help eliminate employee time on low value activities and save more time for high value activities, which are very important in the charity sector because there's so much about that as relationship building. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was that 69% believe that AI can help them cover necessary but repetitive tasks. And it really came down to this idea of, can you find the pattern in the task? Can you find this repetitive thing that I do every day and really automate that with AI? And generative AI specifically came up there. And then the last thing that I've heard a lot of is 80% of nonprofits really believe that AI can help them find the right information. So regardless of what AI tool you're using, whether that's going to Bing or going to ChatGPT, we are seeing more and more AI usage as a search function, and it's cumulatively giving you the summarization that you need. So I think ultimately, what we need to talk about here is maybe less about the hype piece and the actual usage, but take a look at what's happening in the charity sector. And I'm really pleased to report that most of the nonprofit leaders and professionals that we talk to day in and day out see a lot of value in this particular tool.
Perfect. And anything to add on that, Dan? And would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners as well?
I'm Dan Kershaw. I'm CEO at Furniture Bank based in Canada. Operations are in Toronto, but we support a wider network across Canada. We're just 50 employees, about 15 knowledge workers in that mix. So we're not tiny, but we're not big either. And we've been using AI since it's coming up to a whole 2 years of using generative AI, which I'm told is like we're dinosaurs. We've been doing it forever. But I remember, I just shared in the chat, I was there when the internet started, when I had a lot of hair and it was red. And there were our newspaper articles that the internet is just a passing fad. And at the time of that article, I was working in tech, and there were lots of businesses doing tech, but there were lots and lots of people who weren't. And then, fast forward 24 years, who on this planet doesn't touch the internet one way or the other? So I quickly read that article, and I see a lot of the similarities, that depending on where you are and how you need to engage with information, people may see, like my mom, she's like, I don't need internet, she says in a very British accent. And I'm like, I agree, Mom, you don't. But if you're a student or you're in a nonprofit trying to Devi's point, eliminate repetitive, boring tasks and make work more decent, they will be very interested in it. So I think it's an interesting new attention-getting article, but I keep getting a lot of inquiries saying, you're actually doing it, Furniture Bank. Like, yes, we are, but we're not doing anything grand or grandiose. We're just starting. And I think that's something you'll hear from me a lot, is just start. Because as you kind of move and navigate, how Zoe would use AI is going to be different than how Dan uses it. And it just becomes very personalized as you go through this journey.
And then if we jump forward in time 5 years, both of you, before we circle back around and dive into a bit more of the detail of what's going on for both of you day to day with AI, if we fast forward 5 years ahead, how do you both think it's going to transform the nonprofit sector?
I'm going to be I'm not so much pessimist, but I worry about the next 5 years because I worry about, just as we just talked about, there are those organizations that are leaning in to say, tell me more, help me understand. How can it help me? How can it help my staff? How can I have more impact in all of the house? They're going to be fine because they're finding their way to make it more impactful. At the same time, all across the world, most charities funding, it's all going down. There's almost a linear line, and if you just assume it's straight line, in our lifetimes, there's not going to be money being given to charities to operate. And yet, anytime I go into a conference, what's the first thing that comes up when all of us SPOs get together? We need more funding, but there's no funding coming. But I look at AI and what it's giving, and we'll talk about what we've seen for ourselves is for $1 a day, it suddenly is this huge multiplier effect. It essentially gives us capabilities that we would have never afforded any other way. And that's a conversation that I find missing entirely in the discourse about AI. We focus on ethics, and I know we'll talk about it. We focus about a bunch of things, but we never look at the magic. I used to thought I was a muggle, and then I used AI, and I'm like, wow, we can do some fantastic things that we would never do without AI. There's lots of risks to it, but I worry there's going to be winners and losers. So, I've heard this throwaway line about many things, AI won't, put you out of a job. I'm going to flip it. AI isn't going to close your charity, but a charity using AI might. There are lots of charities who do similar work, and it's the ones that really lean in and take advantage of these new superpowers that will probably find more impact quicker. And that's a choice that comes with leadership and having that. So I worry about a digital divide that widens rather than comes together. So those things are worrying me. So that's the pessimist. I'm hoping Debbie's going to leave with the possibility.
No, I would love to say that I 100% agree with you. The number one role that we have, and I like to think of myself as, the primary function of my role is listening and learning from nonprofits to really understand what the sector challenges are. And I think that the number one thing that we hear is that charities all over the world are at this inflection point, right? They are in a state of what I call a polycrisis. And what that effectively means is that, we're seeing a decline in charitable giving. That's at about 70.5% of nonprofits around the world are anticipating a decline in charitable giving in this next year. We see a staffing crisis. 74% of nonprofits report job vacancies that are going unfilled. There's a mental health crisis, and that's twofold. That is affecting both the employees within the nonprofit, but also the communities they serve. And then, of course, there's this greater demand for programs and services that the nonprofit is actually providing for the community. So here we have all of these things that are putting more and more pressure on the sector, and in comes AI at this inflection point. So we have to ask ourselves, is it adding more challenges or is it adding an opportunity? And the answer that we are hearing repeatedly is this is the opportunity. And in fact, every single one of those polycrisis layers that I identified, AI potentially has a role in. Is it the only answer? Absolutely not. But it is one tool in our toolbox that we didn't have before. And the biggest worry that we have as people who support the sector is that nonprofits will get left behind, right? If this is anything like digital transformation and the way that nonprofits and charities were starting to embrace digital tools, which is something you're very familiar with, Zoe, we really need to see a faster rate of absorption. But at the same time, what an incredible position nonprofits are in to absorb these new tools, because you don't need to be a technologist. right? You
Yep.
can learn this as anybody can use this tool. This is natural language, and it's natural language in multiple languages, even more important. So talk about accessibility, right? We know some of the places where this tool is free. I'm going to plug Bing. If you use Microsoft Bing, the generative AI tools are built right in, the latest state-of-the-art tools, which is really, really important to get started. I would also say a lot of free learning is out there right now on generative AI. We have learning pathways for nonprofits that we provide for free. They could go in there and understand how to use this in different ways. So I think when I think of the next 5 years, I'm full of hope actually
Mhm.
for the sector. I think that there's so many places where a lot of those basic tasks can get taken over by AI, which leaves the nonprofit professional who's focused on community growth and development, who's focused on strategic programs and problem solving to really use those skills and have more time to do so.
Yep.
So even some of the conversations we have around unrestricted giving, for example, or conversations around, recurring gifts, all of these could potentially change because of the way we use AI. And I love to think about the future of what that looks like. The last thing I'll say on the future in the 5 years is the nonprofit sector, the charity sector never gets enough applaud for how innovative they are. There are so many stories every day of scrappy nonprofits who are in there creating new ways of doing things, new tools, and leveraging technology in very, very innovative ways. And in fact, sometimes if you want to see how technology should really be used, go to some of the most vulnerable, least resourced communities and see how it's being used. And that's what I'm most excited about in these next 5 years. We're going to see use cases pop up in food insecurity, in housing affordability, and Dan knows that world really well. We're going to see use cases in healthcare, in faith based organizations. All of this is really going to change how the sector works with each other and potentially even teach others how to
Mhm.
use AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, and it's come along at just the right time, hasn't it? If you know how to make the most of those opportunities. So let's talk about challenges now. What do you both see as some of the biggest challenges that nonprofits face when they're adopting AI technologies?
For me, I'm watching my peers, and I tend to put the blame and the opportunity on whoever is leading the organization. I'm fortunate that I was feels like born with a computer in my hands, and I was always curious. I've always been curious, so I have the privilege of curiosity in that the charity I'm responsible for, the need is here in Canada, we have millions of people who have housing, but they don't have beds. And that includes the children. So for me, applying that personal curiosity of what can I do, bootstrapping to Devi's point, low cost, find clever ways to help one more child, or 10 more, or 100 more, or 100,000 more, the beds they need. Because in the case of our driver teams who are doing deliveries, they're delivering furniture and they can see the nest of clothes that the children were sleeping in yesterday. It's a reality that is invisible. I didn't know about it before I joined Furniture Bank, but it's everywhere. It's a very silent type of poverty. So in the mindset of leaders, like we have big giant companies like Moderna who've gone all in. And I mean literally all in. It's a fascinating case study of how they are transforming the company into an all AI organization. For us, it was just having a problem and just a little bit of curiosity and an hour. And then suddenly we saw, hey, this could actually help in the following way. And we've just, using a baseball metaphor, bunt our way around the bases at our speed. So there's nothing that, any big AI person would say what Furniture Bank doing is very simple. It's straightforward. There's nothing magical about it, but we started and we continue to start and we continue to look for things. So having that mindset of leadership, because I've met many either boards or leaders who said we don't want AI in the building. But the reality, Debbie probably has the actual stats, but AI is already in the building. If you don't say you can bring AI in, it's coming in the pockets and laptops. What do they go? BYOA, bring your own AI into the building.
That's
It
right.
is
We say
happening.
BYOAI.
Yeah, and that's risky. I would much prefer Furniture Bank learn how to use it appropriately together, and that we learn together and we have guidelines together. And it's because we're like learning the internet, it's always changing, and we may as well learn together. So the training is another challenge, which it's not like take a webinar. And Debbie, I love Microsoft training, but the problem with the training is it's in a more traditional way. And as a parent of a homeschooling 4 kids, it's actually more like homeschooling, but dragging adults back to homeschooling. So the training is like, get your hands dirty. It's not sit and listen to a video and magically we'll all be AI.
Agree.
You have to have the spark to go, oh my, pick your favorite word. I can do this or I could do that. It's a very hands-on, and then the momentum goes, and then the team just starts. And then those videos that Microsoft and many others have start to click and fit. But until you have that aha moment, it's very hard to do training the traditional way.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. And it's also interesting because I point this out, and this goes back to the article that you shared, Paul. Everyone is learning this at exactly the same time. So the one, piece of the article in the BBC around Gen Z adopting this faster, I just don't think that's true. In fact, I see all generations trying it at exactly the same time because it's new to all of us and it's available to all of us at the same time. So in a lot of ways, where you are in your hands-on trying and failing sometimes, and then trying
Yes.
again is really what matters. I also agree with Dan. Sort of 3 concerns that I'm seeing, or challenges I'm seeing in adopting AI. The first is skilling. In fact, I think in our survey, which is late 2023, so we have a new one coming out soon, is really about this idea on the learning curve. Folks feel like there's a lot more learning to be done than they actually realize. So going in and trying it, to Dan's point, practicing your prompts. I always tell people to understand tone, understand cadence, be polite when you're writing your prompts, and giving some quick tips on those has always been effective, but you're not going to learn it unless you try it. So really, really important. The second challenge I'll say is charities are very concerned about what donors think.
Mm.
And they want to understand that if they use AI, particularly for donor-facing outcomes, what will the donors think? And this is where a study by the Charities Aid Foundation, based in the UK, that represents several hundreds of thousands of charities, has really been effective, because what the study is showing us is that donors want charities to continue to use AI. They believe the benefits outweigh the risks. And I think that study, in addition to a lot of other similar type community momentum, is helping charities realize that donors feel good about it. But what I would always say is be transparent. If you've used AI for something, for an image or for a email that you've written, or for an outward facing marketing collateral, tell people you've used AI. It's your source, right? You would put a little source at the bottom.
Debbie, can I ask you? I don't tell people when I use a spell checker. So I agree with you, tell it
Yeah.
when it's being used, but when is it too silly? Because AI is in everything we do.
Yeah,
And when I use Grammarly or Microsoft's grammar checker, there's predictive AI in there.
absolutely.
So it was just to have you here, like, because everything I would send out was technically I'm using AI.
Yeah, and I think
It's,
about it as a hill that we're all
yeah.
climbing, and you're just climbing a lot faster, Dan. Like, you're already at the top of
Yeah.
that hill, and everyone else is still sort of climbing up it.
Yeah.
So while they're still climbing up it, continue to be transparent and tell people, but we'll reach a critical mass, right? There will be a moment in time where this is how we work. But right now, everyone is changing, not their job, but how they approach their
Yeah.
job. And in order to do that, we have to start these small steps and be very, very transparent. I will say my favorite thing about when people use AI for social media posts is when they share their prompt. I think that's perfect, because not only are you being transparent and saying I used AI, you're saying this is the prompt I used. And then on top of that, you're teaching others how to use prompts. And it's a really valuable place for the place we are all at today in our learning journey. So I think that's really powerful. And then the last thing I'll say on challenges, and this also goes to a point that Dan made, is around most nonprofits the world over don't have internal policies on how to use AI. They just don't have it. They don't have board approval. They don't have a rollout strategy. They don't have a here's a set of 4 tools you should use, and here's how you can use them. And here are some places where you should not use AI. And that policy, I think, is probably what's holding charities back. Just an initial draft of that is I think probably one of the biggest challenges right now that I'm seeing, where people are saying, I don't want my marketing team to use image generation for X, Y, and Z cases in the humanitarian field, for example. And all of those are absolutely understandable, but all it really needs to do is get down on paper, run through boards, and make sure that for each and every charity and their specific use cases, there's an understanding of the policy.
And I agree, Devi. We created our AI manifesto. I'm a marketer by training. Policy manifesto, I go with manifesto. It was more of an internal document, though it's public facing. So that, because staff are always watching leaders. And if the leaders suddenly scowl or squint, and they'll back right off, even though they're seeing the opportunity. So for us, it's it's out there and public facing, but the intention is that our staff will learn and will iterate. We're just getting our little AI council off the ground and learning. Like it's very iterative and very organic at this point.
Oh, I love that. What does the AI Council do?
Right now, it's me kind of bringing everybody back to the homeschooling session and helping them. They all have to read Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence, which
Great
is my number one. If you aren't interested in AI as nerds like me, go read that, because that's your on ramp. And then we essentially have a book club, and then we start. I have a little prompt which I make everybody use, which essentially is saying, I'm an AI consultant helping you. Your job role is, and they describe whatever their job role is, come up with 30 different ways that AI might help, and then we discuss. And then we identify. And one of the first things that came out of it was around our phones. So we're now in the process of implementing an AI augmented phone system that will help that pain point for that group of people, that will give our donors a more effective way of engaging with us. So it's bunts and base hits.
Amazing. It's so inspiring hearing you both talk about the approach to all of this and how to make it more manageable. And Dan, I love your point about taking this homeschooling method and really just throwing yourself in and learning. And Devi, you've described one of the key barriers that's holding nonprofits back around the need for a policy. And I know that Microsoft is obviously doing some very exciting work in this area around an AI policy framework. Can you give us a bit of a sneak peek into what that's going to include when it's released this summer, and tell us a bit more about what nonprofit leaders can expect from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this came out as a real challenge, pain point from a lot of interviews and discussions I had with nonprofits around the world, really. And what we realized actually is that every country has their own AI policy or their own AI Act, if you will. And the EU certainly has its own, and the UK, and then of course, what's happening in the US, Canada as well. So what we really realized needed to happen was something that was coming from the community. And so we found some nonprofit leaders who were really interested in taking this on and creating sort of a modular, templatized set of policies that people could mix and match and take a la carte, if you will, that would fit their charity's needs. And included in that is videos on how to use the templates, and then also an opportunity to get board approval. So a presentation to your board on how this policy would work. Now, I think Dan is well ahead of the curve
Oh,
again on this.
I'll take an early beta, Debbie. I'd be happy to.
I'm happy to hear that. So as the community is working on this, Microsoft has stepped in to effectively provide the financial support for that. And I think this is a really important opportunity for us because it cannot be something that Microsoft tells people how to do, right? We are a business and we cannot develop policies that are, specific to nonprofits. That really has to come from charity leaders themselves. And it has to be something that's specific to their use case and their needs and the ethical considerations that are within that use case. And I know Dan will get into a lot more detail around some of the amazing work he's been doing with AI and some of the ethical considerations he had to take into account there. But that's a great example of why the policy has to start at home and with the sector.
That sounds like a great approach. We'll look forward to that coming out, and please do send us the link when it comes out as well, because we can share it with our listeners. And Devi, you and I have talked before about that talent crisis in nonprofits, and you mentioned that when we spoke a few weeks ago, and also earlier on this conversation too. How can AI help there in terms of helping nonprofits attract and recruit and retain AI experts?
Yeah, and I think the talent crisis is something that I take quite personally because I started my career in nonprofits. It was my first job and was my first job for many years, almost over a decade, after I joined the workforce. And I've always believed it to be the best career choice that you can make in whatever angle you want to go, whatever place you want to end up. And the reason for that is I was Jill of all trades, master of some, running a marketing department of 2 people in a small nonprofit of 25 people. And there were so many things I learned from that job that I use today still. And so when I see the talent shortage and I see the different ways that nonprofits are talking about things like burnout in the sector, I'm curious about the value of AI in the context of these roles. And I actually think that having more AI usage within the sector will attract more talent to the sector. And I'm really excited about that because I think it was the World Economic Forum that talked about this idea that 133 million new jobs will be created because of the collaboration between humans and technology by 2030. I mean, and most of those jobs are really AI-driven jobs, right? They circle around AI in some way, and this is where nonprofit workers, whether that's in the food insecurity space, humanitarian space, conservation space, well beyond that, in any sort of poverty alleviation area, I think AI will become a key facet of all of the value chain within the nonprofit. So how are we reaching out to the community? How are we training volunteers? How are we matching services and matching programs? Every single piece of that value chain. And then I think about the talent shortage and I ask myself, is this something that's going to help plug that gap for us?
And I'll just add, I forget, I was listening to, I think, Nathan Chappelle talking about a study in the US that was just highlighting that a lot of the people in the nonprofit space are leaving because they want to be able to use the tools, to be able to innovate. And the following statement doesn't mean I'm swimming in employees, but I've had people discover this social enterprise charity is all AI-ified and technology forward. And they've reached out to say, I like that, and I'd like to come work for you. So a sample of one, maybe, there's a conversation about decent work here in Canada. And there really isn't a conversation about making the work more decent explicitly. And I think that's for Furniture Bank how we're trying to leverage AI to augment the work so that you can do the people stuff and let the commodity or the transactional thing that are multiple steps. So that's, I'm lean towards that it can also not just, it can bring people from outside the sector into the sector. Because I agree, Debbie, it's like, it is a career with meaning. And
Correct.
if you work in a place that supports being creative and innovative and using the best tools like you would in any other organization, then you'll keep people forever.
So that seems like a good moment, Dan, to ask you more about how Furniture Bank is using AI day to day. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it started with a problem. We all of us have this fundraising problem, and we all have our annual campaign. Now, for me, I'm a for-profit person. I'm now 11 years young into this sector, so I'm learning every day. But I also do things the way the for-profit sector would do, and it was like we have to do the annual campaign. July 25th, Midjourney 3 was announced, and my son said, "Hey, Dad, have you checked out Midjourney 3?" No surprise, my kids are nerdy too. And I looked at it, and I'm like, I had privilege of curiosity. I'm like, maybe. So, 26 years as a charity dealing with furniture poverty. We've only ever had 3 photos where we were invited in to see what that squalor looks like. And yet every charity wants to send out photos of the problem that they're trying to solve. Ours is, the villain is the floor. The villain is cold. The villain is unable to study. You can't go to Adobe Stock and say, please provide in itself, it's unethical. And as a father, so there's the ethical part. I'm not, as a father, going to haul a photo crew in on the assumption I can even find families. So it would be exasperating the poverty porn issue that's out there. And yet, I have 26 years of stories from families on what it is like. And there was that light bulb moment of, so Midjourney says it can take text and imagine something. And so we began and we experimented. And what we did was a campaign called The Picture Isn't Real, but the Reality Is. And we sent postcards to our donors linked with the furniture donations that they had given. So if Debbie had given a dining room table, we would have sent her an image of what it was like without a place to eat. And that's snowballed things. So we would never have been able to do a traditional photo shoot of the problem. It would have cost us $30,000+ plus so we wouldn't, back to possibility, I would never have considered it. It would have not gone through the decision tree at Furniture Bank as being possible. But we pulled it off, and we're still continuing. And now it's actually moving into our impact measurement method. So we're still in the experimentation phase, but notionally every day we see 20 families who either are physically living in this state of furniture poverty or escaping it. And we're trying to find dignified ways that they can privately explain it themselves in their own words anonymously, that will then go into a visualization engine that will show. Today we met, randomized name, and this is their experience. So we can feed it into our impact measurement systems for qualitative data for the impact work, but we also have something to help people understand that when you donate or downsize or you move and you make sure your home goods and furnishing items don't go to landfill, they get into Furniture Bank, that these are the types of stories that they're solving. And in our case, it's 72 hours. Zoe, if you're in Toronto and we came and took away your living room, it's back into the community in 72 hours. So we've used that so it's not a 1-year campaign. It's sort of the way we are advocating the issue because it's hard to show it. And that snowballed into really everything because we're starting to lean in to say, what else would we like to do? Because we all have a wish. Like, wouldn't it be great if every charity, if you could wave a magic wand and solve the issue there's a lot of things that you could do. And AI can augment the team to do that in some ways. So we're writing and presentations, common, everybody sees it. We're looking at web translation. I can't afford to web translate 1,500 pages into one language, let alone 30, when we're dealing with, and yet for $300 a month, I can AI augment my website and suddenly become accessible to my whole community. Phones, videos, translation. I'm experimenting right now so that our volunteers, you may have seen the demo that OpenAI just gave around translation. I tried it and it built a little GPT. So our volunteers now are technically multilingual because now they can say that the client can say, I speak, I'm making this up, Urdu. And now in theory, the iPad will be able to translate in real time as they're moving through the showroom, building the home of those goods. So there's a lot of experimentation. I could go on and on about all the ways, but for us, it's a runway or a marathon is probably a better way. It's not all going to get done this year, but we're more or less creating a wish wall of the things we wish to augment with AI. And I use the word augment explicitly because people at the heart of what all charities do, and using it to augment their work will end up having much more impact.
And Dan, as I'm looking at the images that Furniture Bank has created using the AI tools, I see a young child looking outside a window that is covered by a cloth, probably not a curtain, but a cloth, and is sitting on a pile of clothes.
Yes.
And so for that image to be created, you worked on a prompt anonymously with members of the community that were going through this experience.
Yes.
In order to show that. This
Yeah.
is,
So we took.
I'm looking at the Furniture Bank Imagine Furniture Poverty Gallery right now, and I can see some of these really incredible and heartbreaking images.
It's I'm heartened, and that's now a way of drawing in people because all of us, we want to engage with our donors who are interested. So we use it as a way of engaging in the conversation. Because I can tell you, when I got headhunted, have you ever heard of a furniture bank? I'm like, no, what is that? Is that actually a problem? None of us know. In the UK, it's a huge issue. Probably, bigger than Canada. It's a huge issue in the US. Nobody knows. So for us, it's actually a way of engaging people to lean in and ask the questions, tell me more. And that in itself has a long-term impact on the work that we do. So it's for everybody who's listening to it, you all have a pain point you wish could be made faster, cheaper, easier, pick your verb. And AI probably can help some way, but you have to start. And I just started one day where I tinkered and I watched a YouTube and I played, and then the light bulb went off and the campaign happened. And that's only 2 years ago. And it's not like you're 2 years late. To Devi's point, yes, I know I'm an early adopter and I'm proud of it, but it doesn't take long to suddenly become comfortable with the potential of AI.
And it's super exciting looking at this page, and we'll put the link in the show notes. I love the fact that you've got an AI-based fundraising ask. When you scroll down the page, you're not trying to hide it. You're saying, actually, help us do more by using AI and being innovative with AI.
Yep.
And I've not seen another nonprofit do that yet. And I think it's brilliant.
Well, and I haven't seen many foundations step up to say, yes, we will give you money to explicitly explore how to augment your organization with AI. In Canada, with some of the grant databases I put in AI, I got 0. So it is. So yes, I would love this podcast to flood the donations so that we can accelerate, bringing in more people, and because it's really coming back to that, creating the space for that homeschooling. Because we're a Microsoft shop, and like the tools are many. We're almost spoiled with tools, but it's learning how to pick up that big unwieldy Swiss Army knife, because AI really is more of it's not a screwdriver, it's a giant tool to really understand how to hold it, how to use it, what to use first. So yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of practical examples, and we've heard some of the risks, and we've heard some of the challenges along the way. And I think there's a particular issue that Zoe and I can explore perhaps in the intro around ownership within the organisation, particularly from a leadership perspective. I think there's a really fascinating piece that I'll share with you all about not creating the CAI as it might be called, or the like we did with digital transformation CDOs and stuff. Probably a thing of the past as we tried to move that across the piece and get everybody involved in transformation. But what's the one piece of encouragement that you'd like to share with nonprofit leaders who are feeling excited, and probably more so now that they've listened to this podcast, but are still a bit trepidatious and possibly overwhelmed by the change that might be headed their way? What's the one piece of advice you would leave them with?
The big one is to start listening to podcasts. And there is just a couple. Just listen. There's Everyday AI, there's fundraising.ai, there's etc. Just start listening. There's pick up Ethan's book, Co-Intelligence. It's the only book that I found that is not, I guess it's something I gave to my mom, and my mom is not technical, and she read it and she thanked me. I've given it to many people as an on-ramp to understanding how to think about AI. And all you need to do is start using it in your everyday, as Ethan will highlight, is just try using it everywhere. When you have your workup, have Bing next to it and the Copilot and test it, because you're going to find things that it does really well for your job and things it doesn't do well. There's a few things Bing just hasn't done it yet, but that's okay, because today is the worst AI we'll ever use. Tomorrow it'll be better. And if that's all we do, then the conversations around ethics can actually be more fulsome, because it's really being held by organizations that are doing AI. Because a lot of the conversation about ethics is with people who aren't doing AI right now. So for me, it's unethical to talk about ethics until we're all using it in even the smallest way.
Yeah, and I'd like to share a larger sort of global perspective on why I believe the charities sector should take the lead in using AI, and that is to become the architects of what AI can actually deliver for everyone else.
Yeah.
This is a sector that are experts in fields around global health and fields around hunger and humanitarian issues and refugees, displaced populations. When we go into these tools and we are asking questions or finding information, I want the charity sector to be the source of that information. And that means becoming the architects of the solution itself. So the more you use it, the more you are training the tool to rely on the right sources. And so the more I talk to the nonprofit sector, the more I say, you are so proximate to the problems. Can you be proximate to the technology solutions, or in this case, the non-technology solutions as AI is, that will help to solve them. So I'm very, very excited about that.
So Debbie, my throwaway line is, we hear about bias in AI. Let's use our sector's bias to break the bias.
You said it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you so much, Dan. This has been absolutely inspirational and is going to provide so much food for thought for our listeners. So thank you so much for coming on Start to the Top.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you so much once again to Debbie and Dan for coming onto the podcast and sharing their thoughts with us. A really fascinating dive into AI, and we have more on AI to come in future episodes.
Next up will be Tim Cook. No, not that one, but that one from AI Confident. So a bit of a focus on AI over the next few weeks from us.
Yeah, we've got some very exciting AI-themed episodes coming up for you, so we do hope you enjoy those. As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you for doing that. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us reach more people. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, do share us with a friend.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
See you then, and bye for now.
Bye.